Okay, welcome in. So we're going to be building a really cool extension table here. Kind of a modern style. They leave stowaway under the table in these cool little trays that fold down. A lot of challenges with this table. Simple design, but just a lot going on with the extensions and the leaves. I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by my good friends over at Simply Safe. Remember, there's no safe like Simply Safe. So we're going to start this build with the legs. We've got to get some 4x4 legs. They're actually 3.5 by 4, and we're going to glue together 8/4 oak here, white oak. This is all riffs on white oak. Anytime I laminate two pieces up like this, I try to hand plane them. I have thousands of dollars worth of machinery in my shop, but the best way to get a flat smooth surface is with a hand plane. Notice the book match there on the end grain. So we'll roll some glue on. This is a great little glue roller here. It gets a nice even spread of glue and then clamp it down. A little trouble keeping that book match lined up, so I had to get a clamp on the side here to kind of hold it in position, and then I could clamp it down. All right, moving on. These are the leaves. So we want to try to lighten up the leaves. The piece here weighs about 21 pounds. This is the substrate, the core for the veneer. We're going to be putting two together to get roughly 1.5 inch thick top. So that would be 42 pounds. So what we got to do is CNC. This is something new I'm trying out. Basically making a kind of cored out substrate with this grave pattern. You can see here on my program how this is going to work. These are two leaves put together. It's a long program, so I don't want to sit here and show you the full carving. We'll come back to that here in a second. While that's running, I'm going to work on laying up the veneers. So we've got, like I said, we've got riffs on white oak, 16th inch thick veneers. I'm going to start off by making a straight line cut on these, just a rough cut, using a track saw to cut them down about 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch oversized to the final width. I cut these at a batch, so I'm doing 9 at a time, I believe, because each surface of the top took 9 leaves to get the width. Once I cut them, I use the actual core as a guide, a straight edge. I've got a nice clean straight line on that, and then I've got this bottom bearing bit that I can run as a reference on that straight line and basically cut a straight line over onto the veneers. And I do this as a batch. You can see I've got quite a few stacked up there, and I got to do both sides. So I'll cut one side, tape it off, try to keep them all together and don't allow them to move because I want them all to be the same width. And then I'll clamp them off on the end of the core here, the plywood core, which works great because it's about the same length as my veneers. So I can get them clamped down real nice and then move into doing the exact same cut we just did on the other side. Keep in mind here I'm using a climb cut. That keeps us from having any chip out or tear out in this veneer since it's thin pieces. It's not super well supported. If you do a regular conventional cut, it can chip pretty badly and break out. All right, so we're going to lay these out and you'll get an idea of kind of what this work is accomplished. I was right, we had 9 veneers there. All right, so circling back to our leaves, now we're gonna weigh this. We've gone down from 21 to 13 pounds, so basically 42 total pounds to 23 pounds. It's pretty significant cut in weight, and you get a look here at how this works, this whole grid system, and how we just glued it together. It was actually pretty impressive how well it worked. I might consider doing it on the top as well on future projects just to lighten it, because when you stack up 2 pieces of 3/4 plywood you end up with a lot of weight and it gets really heavy. All right, so we're going to shift gears to joinery now, laying out for mortises. These are going to be 1/2 inch mortises. We need beefy mortises here. This is basically the structure of this table is the 4 aprons and they connect into the legs, and it's a heavy tabletop and it's got a good span, so we need some strong joints. They're going, I think we're about 2¼ to 2½ inches deep. This mortiser has proven to be an amazing machine. I mean, this is solid oak, and we're able to make pretty deep cuts in with a 1/2 inch chisel if it's well tuned up. So I absolutely love this machine. It works great. So we got the part flipped. You get a little better shot of how this tooling works. All right, moving on to this apron. So this shorter apron, we got a little bit of a tricky section here. It's in 3 parts. So we got to create a hole in that apron for the extension to come out of. Okay, so while we're working on putting together this apron, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Simply Safe. My family has taken several trips over the summer. We recently got back from a short trip to New York City, and I love having my Simply Safe systems on both my shop and in our house just to give security. Not only do I know that it's protected 24/7 from theft, fire, or flood, but I also can monitor my property from anywhere on the app, so I can see if anyone approaches my house, anyone shows up. I have a doorbell camera, I have 2 outside cameras, and when they detect motion, I automatically get a notification on my phone, which I love that aspect of this security system. Now, I originally installed the Simply Safe security system into my shop about 6-7 years ago after it flooded, because I was looking for something that could monitor a water situation, because the way my shop was built, if we get a lot of rain, water comes in. I had no idea the benefits I would get from the system outside of just water, especially with the video monitoring. And that, alongside their Fast Protect monitoring live guard, allows agents to respond within 5 seconds of an alarm. They get real-time views of what's happening in your home. They can see the intruder, and they can relay information to first responders. That smart alarm camera is one of my favorite additions, because it just makes me feel more comfortable and safe, especially when I'm not in town and it's my wife home with the kids. That camera just adds an extra level of security to the system. Great thing about Simply Safe is there's no long-term contracts. You just pay monthly. You can cancel anytime. Simply Safe is concerned with keeping you safe, not locking you in. Their pricing is transparent and affordable, starting at less than $1 a day. Now here is the great news. Simply Safe is offering my viewers 20% off your home security system when you sign up for a Fast Protect monitoring plan, and you get your first month free. Just got to go to simplysafe.com/Andy Rawls. Remember, there's no safe like Simply Safe. Not only do you get an amazing security system that protects your home, but you also help support my channel in the process. I've been very blessed to have Simply Safe as a supporter of this channel. And like I said, I've had their system in both the shop and the house for around 6 years now, and I wouldn't turn them off. Go check that out. Link is in the description. A big thanks to Simply Safe. Let's jump back into this build. So with the apron made, we're gonna shift. We're doing a lot of jumping around, so that I do apologize for, but we're going to laying up veneer. Jeremiah's helping me here. We've got everything taped off. All the prep work we did earlier in the video, we've now taped it with blue tape into sheets, basically. And we're laying down epoxy as the adhesive, and then basically gluing these sheets on in the table press.
What just happened?
Okay, not a very graceful fall there, but I do have to give myself credit for the recovery. Could have been worse. Kind of pulled some ninja moves out there. So continue laying on epoxy. The reason I use epoxy here is just for the open time. It allows plenty of time to get that adhesive spread without it tacking off. We put a cover sheet on. That's a really important part of this process, and that will allow for a good even press over the top of that veneer. We're jumping to assembly of the base. We've already, you can see the aprons we worked on there. We've already glued that section. I always glue table bases up in stages. I'll do the short section first and then turn around and put on the long aprons and glue the whole table together. And that's what we're doing here. It's a little bit, I should say I'm doing, it's a little bit challenging, one man here getting this all together. And again, I'm using epoxy just for the open time. Gives me a little bit more time to work on getting it all together. All right, once all that glue sets, I can start putting the guts of the table together. This is going to hold all the mechanisms that pull out the leaves, the supports for the leaves, and then the trays we're going to build that hold the leaves and stow them under the table. Everything's done with dados, so we just kind of glue those in there and tap each piece in. A little bit of clamp to help pull that together. This piece I'm installing here is going to hold the drawer guide. That will be the slide for the extension to hold the leaf. And then there will be one down the middle as well that separates the two spots to store the leaves. And there goes the middle piece. A lot of parts going into the guts of this table. It starts to get pretty complicated at this point. Okay, so this is always an important step in table making, is just leveling off all the pieces. We don't want that tabletop to not sit flat. We don't want it to rock. We don't want any high spots. So any parts that I've assembled in on those dados, making sure that I hand plane everything flush, and it's a nice flat surface for that tabletop to sit on. This tabletop is veneered, so it's stable. It's not going to swell, shrink, move. It's going to actually become part of the structure of the table as we screw it up through the aprons. So I want to make sure that it's flat on all of these components and nothing sticking up and causing it to not sit correctly on the table base. Okay, now we've got to work on that false front on the apron. It's going to have a sliding dovetail, so I've made this jig here that kind of straddles that part, and I'm going to use a bushing on my router to run along that edge with a dovetail bit and doing one pass, make the cut. And you can see here on the CAD, the pull-out system there, and then that front piece that I've highlighted blue, that's what we're working on right now. And the reason I'm using a dovetail joint is because there's a pull force on this. When you pull it out, that dovetail joint mechanically will keep from pulling that piece apart. If it was just a regular dado, it might eventually break. I've got Judd here. He always likes to come up and hang out, so he's getting his safety gear on. He's going to watch me cut the mating dovetail here on the router table. This can be a little tricky just because you've got a tall part hanging up like that. You can see, get a closer look here of what's happening. Just cutting one side with that dovetail bit, flipping it, doing the other side, and then that will match the original dovetail we cut into that drawer front perfectly.
Got it. That's called a dovetail, bud. Sliding dovetail. Pretty cool, huh?
Okay, with that done, we're going to glue that front to it. A couple things to note is we've got a bevel on the bottom of that front. That's a place to grab it with your hands to pull it out, to open it. And then there's a rabbet on top that is going to create a lip for the leaf to actually attach into and be held onto the table. It's also going to create a hideaway place for some clips we're going to install. A lot of moving parts that you'll notice. You'll kind of figure this out when you see at the end how it all works. And just slide those in. I'm going to leave them flush to that top part of the rabbet, or that bottom cutout of the rabbet, and then they're just not quite as narrow. They're a little narrower than the actual drawer front.
Let's flip it now, maybe.
All right, so while those are drying, we're going to set those aside and put the base, actually flip it over and put it on the tabletop, which is out of the bag, pretty much sanded, close and ready for finish. But what we've got to do, the tabletop the legs go through the tabletop. So you're going to see that ingrain. That's one of the reasons why I did that book match on the ingrain. Of course, as you're going to find out later in the video, the finish is kind of going to take all that away. But anyway, it's a cool detail, and this is the design that the client asked for. They have an interior designer, a really great company they're working with, and they provided all the specs. So I'm just figuring out how to build a table for them, even the finish. None of it is my choosing. I'm a custom shop, and when someone wants something, I build it for them. So we've got the base on the top. Basically, we're tracing around these legs so we can mark exactly where those legs go. We got one, Jeremiah clamped one down there so we could just position it right where we wanted it. And once I lay those out and trace them, I've got a little jig I made on the CNC that I can step back off of my line about a 1/16, just put a little bitty reveal on it and cut out those four corners. And we're going to do that first. I'm going to clamp the jig on to the table, take my jigsaw. I got to be really careful with jigsaw, especially when you've got a long blade. They can really cut uneven or unsquare, and you can undercut your line pretty easily. So I actually step back a little bit off of the line. I don't try to get too close, just to prevent that from happening. Cut out the waist, and then I've got a big bottom bearing bit. I love this bit. It's got insert tooling. I'm using it to basically do it all in one pass using my jig. I say it's a bottom bearing bit. It's actually a bearing on the bottom and the top. Since that was a 3/4 diameter bit, the radius is too big for the legs, so I'm just using a 1/4 inch bit, and I'm running it on the shaft of the bit, which is not really how you're supposed to do things, but it works. To get an old bit, it's going to heat it up and burn it, but if you get an old bit, I can take that radius from 3/4 to a 1/4 and make it a little tighter. Flip it over. I got to flip it over because that 1/4 inch bit would only go halfway and come back and do the top as well. So I've got to reclamp the guide, run that 1/4 inch bit on each one of the cutouts so I get that nice tight radius on all four corners. Okay, we're going to move to the trays here that hold the leaves, basically working on the hinge or the pivot point. Jeremiah there was kind of drilling out little pilot holes to mark where we want those, and then I'm coming back on the drill press. You can see the hardware there to the left. I'm working through that and drilling out the bigger holes to hold that hardware. So once I drill those out, Jeremiah can take a big, I think he's got a 5/8 bit or maybe a 1/2 inch, and drill out the holes in the actual table frame, and then that creates the hinge or the pivot point for these trays to drop. And you see how they have that angle on them. That angle is going to hit the tabletop, and that's where they're going to stop. So it's just barely below the bottom of that apron. I didn't cover a lot of the fabrication of the trays. We've got them glued up here. We used dominoes to put them all together, and then we made them just a really tight fit to the opening, and then took a hand plane and some shavings off each side, really fit them nice into the table, the opening they go into, and just made for a nice fit.
I even turned it back a little bit more too.
We're just testing these out here, making sure everything looks good. Jeremiah's going to go ahead and mount the hardware, and we're just basically going to go through a test run here and see how they operate and make sure that our concept here is actually going to play out and work. Now obviously we got to have the tabletop on for it to be to test it, because the tabletop plays a part in where these stop. So we're going to do that now. We're going to place the tabletop on. This tabletop was really difficult to get on at this point because you got like half an inch of overhang from your apron, so it's just hard to get it dropped on without smashing your fingers. So first try here, a few little bitty details that had to be worked out, but for the most part it's good.
So what the
Let's try it again. Is it hitting something?
let's try. Do you have any felt like little tiny bumpers?
I find some. What are you thinking?
What I think it's
The top corner of this is hitting.
yeah, this is coming out just a tad. So if it came like that, try that. It should slide in and out easily. It should go in farther.
Oh.
Does that see what I mean?
Well, what you have to do, I think, is just when you slide it in, you gotta have to lift up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll work.
So the space between here is
Yeah.
getting tight.
Yeah, it's in that top corner of the leaf.
Yeah.
But it's not really. I don't think it's an issue because once I get to here,
Yeah.
when you start pushing it up, you can easily
Right
push
down.
it in. You just have to kind of explain that to them, and then I'll put a couple turnbuckles.
All right, we're going to shift gears now to finish. This thing's getting ebonized. Basically, it's going black. Like I said, this is, I don't really mind it. It fits into the style of the home. It wouldn't be my pick for finish, but like I said, these decisions are all made by an interior design firm, and I just execute it all. It's actually not easy to make a nice ebonized finish. I'm using a dye stain to get the initial black, and then we're going to restain with a shellac black brown mixture because there's a little bit of brown in this, and then we'll clear coat. So there's a lot of steps, a lot of work. I did not stain the interior of it because I just knew it would look like garbage. All those, there's some poplar in there. We used some secondary woods, and it wouldn't stain well, so I just taped it off and just stained the outside oak. The tabletop, we spray the dye stain. You can't wipe dye stain and make it look nice on a large surface, so that gets sprayed, and then we come back and apply a little bit of that shellac sealer and then clear coat it. I go into detail on my Patreon more about this finish if you're interested in learning more about how I did it. So the final few steps is just assemble everything, and then I'm going to give you a good overview of how all this works. All right, so I want to do a little bit of an overview of how this leaf system works. Now, I didn't film a whole lot of that process, and to make up for that, I want to really give you a good overview of it. And the reason we didn't film a whole lot is because it was just a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of figuring it out, trying one thing, didn't work, doing something different, didn't work very well. Originally, I had designed the leaves to kind of, you hold them here and then you stick them up under and tuck them up and clip them. And it was really hard to do. Credit to Jeremiah, he's the one who kind of figured out the drop-down system. There was a lot of exchanging of ideas and bouncing around and changing designs. This table got a little bit more expensive than I originally thought it would just because of that. And that's the challenge with custom furniture, is a lot of times you've got to figure out how to do these things, especially when you got working parts in it. But honestly, the end result is really worth it. I'm happy with it. It functions well. So I want to walk through the entire process right now and how this works. So the first thing we've got to do, right, is to remove the leaves. And in order to do that, we have the aprons. It's basically a false apron right here. So this is a thin, about 3/4 inch piece that is rift white, and it pulls out. It's got very heavy duty drawer guides. So these are AccuRide 3/4 wide by like 2 and they're like 2 3/4 tall. So they're heavy duty guides made to hold a lot of weight. And the reason I wanted that, we originally had a little bit lower quality guide on there, and it had a lot of slop going back to forth like this, and even a lot of play going down like that. And these have a much better ball bearing system, so they're heavy duty. The apron slides through a passage in a false apron back here. So right here we're about an inch, I think we're about 1.5 inches thick. So that's giving the structure and support. And the top is all veneered and solid plywood. So once you screw it all together, there's some structure here. This thing is very stiff, and it's actually adding a little bit of structure as well. Originally when I designed it, I had planned on putting 1/4-inch steel on the bottom and on the top to give it even more rigidity, but we decided we just didn't need that. It was the way it is now with wood on the top and bottom. It's plenty strong enough. You're not going to get any bow or flex in this. It's locked in. So this pulls out. It has a little bit of a spring mechanism. So this is really where we went back and forth a lot. And I'm going to touch base. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. First, let's get this leaf on and we can kind of talk through it. So the first thing you want to do here, once you pull the drawer out, is slide these little clips out. These are basically supports. The purpose of these is to keep this table level. So there's no give or play in these. These are going to allow that leaf to sit on it and be at the same plane as the tabletop because they're the same thickness. So it's kind of a registering piece. Once we have that done, we're going to get the leaf out from under the table. Underneath really quick, just to see what we got. It's going to be a little bit dark down here. A little shaky, so let me get in position. So we got a pivot point here on our frame, just a bolt, and it's got a little bit of, if you could see through this board, which you can, but just imagine you can, the frame has got a little bit of a taper here. So when it drops, that's going to hit on the tabletop, and that's what stops it and allows it to be just barely below the apron of the table so we can access it. So we got turnbuckles here that we just turn. You can see how that kind of popped loose. We got one on each side. So we'll turn the other one, get it loose, and it just drops down. It's going to stop on that edge right there. That pivot point's going to allow it to come up and hit the bottom of the table and stop. So it's not going to go any further than this. It rides on a felt pad, so we've got a very thin felt pad here. And it just pretty easily slides right out. You get it started. It's a little bit dusty because I had it sitting on a dusty table, but this will just slide out. And I find it helpful to put your knee under here to catch it a little bit. And then what we're going to do is pull this out and we're going to clip it into the apron on the other side of the table. Now before we clip it, there's a couple things you'll want you to notice. First, you've got a piece here, an applied 1/4-inch piece, and then you've got a piece here. This piece, so this is the bottom of the leaf. It goes in upside down. This clips to the underside of the tabletop right here, and then this will register against the pull-out drawer guide and create that spring action. So I'm going to put this on. It'll make sense when I put it on. You'll see how it all works. So you'll notice the lip right here in the top of the drawer. That gives clearance for the pull-outs, and it's going to give a spot for that cleat that I just showed you to clip onto. Okay, so we bring the leaf around. Now that bottom cleat that I just showed you, it's going to clip on that apron, that pull-out apron. So I'm going to go a little bit further until it catches right here. And now I have a hold of it. I can use that spring now to pull it back. Now I'm a little bit off alignment, so I just got to slide it over, and it drops right in. And that spring's pulling it back up against the table, and it's giving it that enough force to hold it in place. Now it does have a little bit, I mean, you got to pull on it, but it does have a little bit of slop, but for the most part, this tension in that spring is what's holding it against the tabletop. Take it off. It's just a simple thing as pulling it out till it gets out and then lifting it up, and then you can take it out and put it in storage. You can see how those wood blocks that we pulled out, those are what keep it from falling down and staying perfectly level with the tabletop. It's nice and level. It's got a good grab against it, so it's not really going anywhere, and the guides are solid, so it's in place. And it's got a slight bit of a kick up. Intentionally, it can be adjusted with the guides on how you tilt those to adjust how the leaf sits. All right, so that's it. I think I hope that overview helped you understand how this. If you want more information on the table though, and go more in depth, you go over to my Patreon. I do weekly shop updates. So it's weekly. You can see what's going on in the shop, and then I do overviews of each project I build, talking about all the details of the finish I used, the hours I bid, the hours it took me to build it, just a lot of details. And really, honestly, that information is a lot for myself because it helps me if I need to go back, if I'm going to build, 4 or 5 months from now, a client sees this and is like, hey, we want that table. And I can go back to my cut list, all my plans, and then I can pull the video up and really get a detailed understanding of exactly how to build it and be super efficient on the second run. So that's all over there. That would help support me. No pressure on that. A comment is just as good. So if you have something you want to say, be welcome to leave a comment. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next time.